So welcome everybody to today's webinar. The topic this week is the voice of the customer, and we're going to be looking at customer feedback, how you can use it, and some of the technology involved with it as well. Agenda. I'm Jonty Pearce. I'm editor of Call Center Helper. I'll be running through the introductions. Then delighted to be joined by Lee Mostari. Lee is with Nice Systems, and he'll be taking us through the voice of the customer, looking at the different ways that you can collect customer feedback and their relative merits. Then hopefully we'll be joined by Scott Morrison from BT. Scott's got quite an impressive presentation on what they've been able to do in terms of changing their whole emphasis on collecting customer feedback, and has got some pretty impressive results for that. They've certainly gone forward and presented that for a number of awards, which is very good. Lee is then going to come back and join us and talk us through some of the customer feedback technology. We then have the chance for you to provide your tips for collecting and using customer feedback, and then we have interactive questions and answers from the audience. Across to Lee Mostari from Nice Systems, and Lee's going to take us through the voice of the customer and some of the options available in terms of collecting customer feedback. Across to you, Lee.
Great stuff. Thanks, Jonty. Hi there, all. I wanted to start by sharing a statement. And that statement is, when surveyed, 80% of companies believe they deliver a superior experience to their customers. But when the customers are asked about their perceptions, only 8% of companies are really delivering. So you may have read similar statements with similar percentages, but what I find staggering is the delta between what the company thinks in many instances versus what the what the customer thinks versus what the company thinks. In this case, the delta is sort of 10 times the difference. And it really sort of begs the question, how are companies measuring what great experience looks like if they're getting it so wrong? I've tried to think of different things that they might be measuring to understand that delta. And it could be employee feedback. So are they asking employees about the experience they deliver, which clearly has a positive bias? Maybe they're looking at internal metrics like an internally set quality score in customer services, or an efficiency metric like call handle time or first call resolution. I think neither of which really determine how a customer feels the perception of the brand would be. Maybe it's IVR surveys where agents are cherry picking customers to put through to the IVR survey and clearly selecting only the best customer interactions to put through. Or probably worst of all, it's just a blindness from the senior management who were surveyed here to the real experience that they're delivering to their customers. So really what I want to talk about today is how to build a voice of the customer program which is designed to improve the perception of your customers and also to drive operational performance within the contact center environment. So really wanted to share this distribution curve, and essentially it represents your customer base and the degree of satisfaction customers feel with the service you deliver. So when we talk about voice of customer, it's really easy to hear from the extremes of the distribution curve. So the very negative, those customers that write in to complain about the service they've received, or the very positive, those customers who've taken the time and trouble to write in to compliment an interaction with an agent. Very few and far between, but you do get to hear about the extremes of that distribution curve.
You certainly seem to get that on all sorts of feedback. You know, it's sort of very reminiscent of what I see on things like TripAdvisor. It's either very positive or very negative, and not much in the middle.
And I guess the most important or the most relevant sector are the people in the middle. These are the 85, 90, 95% of customers who are contributing to your revenues, having that contact center experience. So really reaching out to these customers is the best way to enhance your voice of customer program. So really I think there are the 4 questions you need to ask, which is the who, when, what and how. So who do you want to solicit feedback from? Should you take a census approach and ask every customer you have an interaction with for feedback on their experience? The when is the right time to ask for feedback. Needs to be timely because a contact center interaction is only short-lived in the customer's memory. What question to ask, again, needs to be really relevant to the customer to encourage the customer to respond. And the how is making sure the feedback channel is convenient for the customer. At the end of the day, they're taking time out of their day to give you feedback on how you can improve, so it needs to be convenient for the customer. So I'd like to drill into these 4 questions into a bit more detail. So firstly, the who. So you need to ask yourself again, is delivering high volumes of feedback important to meet your objectives? Now, when I talk to customers who are creating voice of customer programs and looking to improve customer experience management, there are 2 key objectives that come out of a voice of the customer program. And those are getting agent level customer experience scores, so customer satisfaction scores or NPS, with actionable insight on how to improve, and delivering service recovery for when things go wrong, because inevitably things do go wrong from time to time. So for both of those objectives, having high volumes of feedback is really important. If you're looking at agent level scoring around customer experience, you want statistically valid samples, tens, hundreds of responses per agent, per month, per quarter, something which gives you a really good basis to benchmark performance. And for recovery, clearly the wider you cast your net, the more likely you are to capture customers who've had a less than perfect experience. So it gives you that opportunity to reach out to a customer to address a problem that may have happened before either they decide to vote with their feet and leave your organisation, or maybe call back and drive higher operational cost and repeat calls. But again, you really want to strive for reaching out to as many customers as possible. And in this example, I've tried to sort of summarise what I see with customers who are embarking on new voice of the customer programs. Typically, they have a sampling of their customer base, where in many instances, less than 1% of the customer population are polled. It reaches maybe 5%. And what we're advocating really is getting up to the 80, 90%, the census approach to drive the volume. And equally, looking at the feedback channels, when I look at perhaps email or IVR, I see between 1 and 11% response rates to surveys. So again, looking at other channels with engaging processes mean you could even get as high as sort of up to 50% response rates to surveys. So both of those combined really give you the opportunity to increase the volume of the voices that you hear from your customers between 10 and even 200 times what you're seeing today. So moving on to the when. So clearly, the closer to the point of experience, the higher quality and more accurate feedback you're going to receive from your customers. And I would articulate that the ideal or the optimum time to do that is within 24 hours of a contact center interaction. So if I think back to the last interaction I had with my bank, it was probably 2 months ago. I can't even remember if I spoke to a male or female advisor. I can remember what I called about, but I don't remember much about the interaction. Now, clearly, if I'd spoken to my bank this morning and received a request for feedback at this time, I'd remember what went well, I'd remember what went less well, I'd probably even remember the advisor's name. So the richness of information you get, the closer to the experience, the better. And as for the what, this is really the make or break to whether customers are going to respond. So you need to get the balance right between what you're solving for as the company and what the customer is going to talk about. So from your perspective, you'll want to understand some insights into your operation, what's working, what isn't working, where you can improve. You probably want to validate some metrics like call handle times or first call resolution, and time to answer. You probably want to understand the customer's experience in those different metrics. And you probably want that data to be nice and heavily structured so you can take action easier. So solving for your benefit is somewhat different to solving for the customer. From the customer's perspective, they want an easy, short, sharp survey. They just want to tell you what they think and get out. If I think of 2 recent examples of surveys I've completed, my train company asked me to complete a survey a week or 2 ago. It was a paper survey. It was maybe 8 pages long, probably something between 60, 70 questions, a lot of which were irrelevant. It was unengaging. I completed it because of the job I do, but it took me probably 20, 25 minutes of my train journey home and was quite dull. It wasn't fit for purpose, really, for that high volume transactional survey. And yet with my mobile provider, when I contact them, I receive an SMS within perhaps a couple of hours of the interaction. It's normally 2 or 3 questions, nice and easy for me to complete. So we need to solve for what's right for the customer, not necessarily what's right for you and statistically valid responses. In terms of best practice, for email surveys, we'd certainly advocate a maximum of 10 questions, maybe something like 7, and for IVR or SMS, around the three questions. But the importance comes from the verbatim. So the metric is great to understand the level of performance, but we want to understand why a customer has scored the way they have. So really, the verbatim comment on every survey is crucial. And let technologies like text analytics and categorization do the heavy lifting to derive the insights and the meaning behind what was important to that customer. Don't try and force customers to answer a set of questions. So really, just to reiterate, want to make that as easy as possible for the customers. So I think, Jonty, we're going to have a poll around the customer feedback collection processes.
Yeah, so it's how do you collect customer feedback? The options are SMS, text message, email, web form, post-call IVR survey, interview, or we don't collect feedback. And I'm delighted that we should be now joined also by Scott Morrison from BT. Scott, can you hear us okay?
I sure can. Good afternoon.
Indeed, good afternoon. So we're just going to close the poll out now and share the results with everyone here. So the answers are 8% text message, by far the most common is an email web form, 28% with the post-call IVR survey, 28% with an interview. Surprisingly here, 14% don't collect feedback. Scott, that's I guess a rather alarming sign.
Extremely interesting. I think I would certainly, when I get onto my presentation, talk about SMS. That seems to be quite low as well, which is interesting.
Okay, great. Well, there, I believe we've got a number of different ways that people collect feedback there. I think you're now going to talk through the sort of the comparative different feedback mechanisms there. Your screen's just disappeared. Hang on, we're on to just Lee's got a slide to bring up on that.
Okay, yep, thanks, Jonty. Hopefully you can see my slide. So I find that interesting, the percentage splits. So what I'm going to talk through are different channels that are open to you. So we've talked about SMS, email, IVR, and interview there. Clearly there's also social media, mobile apps, comment cards, a few others. But really I'm going to focus on the 4 sort of most popular and the 4 from the poll. So really starting with SMS. So we typically see high response rates to SMS surveys. I'll be interested perhaps with the 8% of the audience that use SMS, but from my perspective, having an engaging process for the customer, you could see anything between 25 up to 50% response rates to SMS surveys. So really high volumes. And I think that's due to, in fact, a couple of things. I think the SMS process demonstrates a level of urgency with the customer, but yet isn't too intrusive. I think that many customers are happy to receive SMS, and clearly they can choose to ignore or choose to respond. So we want to make the process as easy as possible for the customer. With regards to email, again, do see pretty strong response rates. So if I were to look at the customers, the nice customers that use email, we see anything between 10 up to 30% response rate for an email survey. You get a lot of detailed verbatim from email, but the responses from customers do tend to be a bit slower. Customers will respond sort of perhaps when more convenient, when they've got more thinking time. So we do see the time difference between sending the email request and receiving the response is somewhat different, or somewhat longer with email compared to SMS. With regard to IVR, we do see lower response rates with IVR, maybe 10% or lower. And the problems we see with IVR are around the verbatim comments. So some solutions we see don't have the ability to leave a verbatim comment. So although you can get a metrics performance score, you struggle with deriving insight for the reasons why a customer scored the way they did. Or where there is a verbatim facility, it can sometimes be timely to do the speech to text, to do some analytics, or to manually listen to all of the verbatim comments from customers. So the analytics side can sometimes be a bit more timely. But on the positive, you do get that immediate response from customers, typically within seconds or minutes after the interaction with the call center. And finally, the person interview. What we see here is, typically very costly, because of the manual element to the process. So we tend to see, more costly surveys here, and sometimes again the time from capturing the feedback to being able to take action is somewhat longer than that 24-hour optimum period I talked about. But on the positive side, the personal touch can increase the advocacy with the brand. So really, in summary, I would certainly advocate a mix of different feedback channels to get the optimum amount of feedback from your customers. But importantly, we would certainly talk around having a single analytics platform to be able to absorb all of that feedback and turn it into meaningful insights. So I think, Jonty, over to you for the next poll.
Yeah, we've got another poll coming up now, and that is, what problems do you face with collecting customer feedback? The options you can vote for are low response rate, whether it's too subjective, whether you have difficulty tracking across multiple channels, whether you've got too much detail, or feedback comes in too late. So if you could just vote on the answers on that. Again, you can vote for more than one subject on there. So while that vote's coming in, Lee, which one would you think is, or which ones do you think are likely to be the biggest ones here, do you think?
So from my experience, I would say the lower the response rate, that's typically what we see when we're talking about changing voice of customer programs, is to get more volume.
Okay, well, we're going to put you on the spot now and see if that's accurate. Just going to close the poll and share the results. So what you're seeing now is that indeed that is the response rate. It is a challenge there. 58% cite low response rate. I guess tied into that, 28% feedback comes in too late, too subjective and tracking across multiple channels. Strangely enough, too much detail doesn't seem to be the channel. Now, it may be that your answer didn't come in the options we did. What I'd like to now do is, if you could put into the box on the right-hand side of the screen, what is your biggest single problem in tracking customer feedback? And if it's perhaps too low a response rate, if you could put into the box what sort of response rate you're getting on there. So if you could put that into the box, what is your biggest problem in tracking customer feedback? And we're starting to get some of the answers coming in here. Karina says they don't collect any customer feedback. Angela says that the problem is a low response rate and infrequent. Interesting. Lindsay says resource to support feedback is a challenge. Kerry says the antiquated system that we're being used does not give valuable enough information to do anything about it. Graham has said that he's got problems with customers completing the IVR survey, which is something that Jimmy also finds. Tim finds there's some selection bias. Ian Dowse finds that in telephone interviews you get different answers back depending on who asked the question. I'm paraphrasing that a bit. Derek said that one of the problems is that it's not granular enough for the action plan. Ben is saying that the 10% response rate from email invites is all that they're managed to get. Saidi says that the problem with postal forms, they do not come back in. And Rayan says customers feel that it's too much effort to do the survey there. So some quite fascinating different feedback there, Scott. I think everyone's going to be very interested now with the presentation that you'll be going through, which is about how you've been collecting customer feedback and the results you've achieved. So Scott, Morrison from BT, across to you.
Thanks, Jonty, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me just bring up some slides. Hopefully you'll be able to see this now, and if I put that on full screen. So, yeah, I'm just going to take 15 minutes and talk through how we have taken the nice FizzBack solution specifically, implemented into our business customer service environment, Some of the challenges at the outset, some of the initial results, and then a kind of hearts and minds overlay of programs to really get people engaged, and then talk through some of the further results we've seen, and a very interesting link back to reduction in churn and retained revenue for the business. So without further ado, just to give a bit of context as to BT Business. So we sit as part of the BT retail organisation, and we have around 1 million customers across the UK, and generally support the kind of SME market, and generate revenue in excess of 2.2 billion a year, with a service desk of around 2,000 service agents alone. Out with that, probably 400 to 500 sales, and same again billing advisors. So a large service organisation that we've now delivered this programme into. In terms of strategy for the company, both at a BT retail level, we have a clear objective to be #1 for customer service, and then locally at a BT business level, that's underpinned through our desire to be market leader on NPI, and to really differentiate through the experience we deliver. So just a bit of history then. So clearly strategically we have the objective, but really in terms of where we were as an organisation, specifically in BT Business, how did we underpin that? How did we get enough of this meaningful customer feedback that Lee and Jonty have talked about previous? So the history was, if you look on the left-hand side, very, very low volume customer responses. And actually one of the challenges that we had was the level of detail in that. So the responses were extremely low and the detail was very high, which gave us a huge overlay in terms of going through all of that feedback and trying to take any actionable insight from it. So low response rates, relatively subjective feedback from customers, and quite frankly, we were in the position where strategically we had the desire to be #1 for service, market leader on MPI, absolutely did not have enough of the customer feedback through volume terms in simple enough format for us to really be actioning that strategy. So hence the communication and the link with Nice Fizzback. We've implemented a solution that gives us real-time customer feedback down to agent level, an extremely simple to use and data-rich dashboard. Interestingly, the opportunity to poll through SMS and you know, the resultant response rates we see from that, and a program wrap from the guys at Nice Fizzback to help us implement all of this effectively. So just immediately to give a sense on the left-hand side of the initial benefits that we've seen from implementation of the program. So I think primarily what it allowed us to do was we aligned the organisation in a one-truth view of customer feedback. So even at the outset, we were seeing far higher volume, more simplistic feedback that was actionable from kind of day one of turning the solution on. Lee also touched on the point around service recovery. So what it allowed us to do from implementation was to flag red alerts. So customers that on the NPS question that scored as a 1 or a 2, we were able to collate that information and directly, and still do, directly contact those customers. And it's the team managers in our community that have that responsibility, both to contact the customer and ascertain as to why they scored as a 1 or a 2, but importantly also to coach the individual in their team that was the last person to speak to the customer that could have prevented that happening in the first place. So the initial benefits, and I'll come on and talk about the numbers in a minute, but the initial benefit was those customers that potentially were distressed, that we hadn't had a mechanism for proactively going out to previous, we were now in a position to do that. Now the resultant link to the churn piece is that those customers, we would never have taken their feedback in volumetric terms before, so they could quite easily have walked away to a competitor. So we've seen some initial uplift. On the right-hand side, we spent a lot of time with the Nice Fizzback transformation team, and we worked through a program of activity that would give us further uplift beyond the initial benefits I talked through there. So firstly, a financial impact, so we added both the MPS and the advisor SAT questions into our financial scorecards for all of our management layer within the organisation. But we importantly spent time with our first line team managers, because that's really where the opportunity was for us. How could we get to a point where they absolutely seen this as their day job? And we done a bit of a time and motion exercise with the team managers to go through, well, what stops you, what prevents you from really actioning direct customer feedback now? And we found there was a lot of things in their day. They spent a lot of time doing root cause analysis, but actually the results of that root cause analysis were the same the day we had that conversation as what they were 12 months previous. So we were in, I think, analysis overload, but not spending enough time addressing the root cause of that, which the solution then gave us the opportunity to do. So implementation of a program that would allow us to really focus on that first line manager level and ensure that they seen their day job as actioning direct customer feedback and coaching their team to improve on the back of that. So the case study I'll talk through now is for our faults and repair channel, which is ultimately our broadband and PSTN telephone line support in the UK for the SME market that I talked about. So the outset of the program then was about really understanding the day job of the team managers, and importantly putting this direct customer feedback and coaching people on the back of that right at the top of the list of priorities for those team managers and coaches. What we did was we implemented a process of an internal call quality system, which basically split our calls into 6 components from welcome through to call closure, and we set very clear expectations as to what was required within each section, but importantly now based on customer feedback. So fine, we could have done this previous, but interestingly what we've got now is we've got a very direct overlay of customer feedback within each of those sections. And just to give you an example, so in call, in the welcome, we have a very clear mandate now that capturing clean mobile numbers for customers is a requirement of the day job, and the output of that is that we know as a result we will drive higher response rates from customers, and that completes a 360 loop where we can then take that feedback. One, we can go out to those customers in distress, but two, we can also then coach the individuals that could have done something to a higher standard in the first place. So that's just one example. What we've also done is we've implemented a process where we log all reactive coaching. So again, we had a coaching and management community that spent a lot of time reactively coaching people on probably a lot of the same things day in, day out. So we have a very clear process now where we log all reactive coaching, and we work with our internal learning and development teams to produce short learning videos that are delivered in weekly huddles. So if we see that we're seeing a particular trend on a particular coached item, then we'll produce these kind of 4 or 5 minute short videos that will go out in the team huddles, and it allows, and again we'll talk about it on the numbers, but it allows the team managers and the coaches to be back on the front foot, proactively coaching people rather than reactively waiting for something to happen. So that was the implementation over and above just turning the tool on itself to give us the actionable customer feedback. In terms of some of the...
And it looks like on that one there, Scott, you had a screen there. You could actually put customer feedback up onto the wall board. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we have an internal BT TV system, and we really push the point that yes, you've got direct customer feedback, and within these kind of 360-degree coaching sessions, what you've got is you've got a team manager that can listen to the call recording. They can take the individual into a coaching session, listen to the call together. They can overlay the customer's feedback on top of that, so you get a completely rounded view. What was really important was that we didn't just critique to excellence, but that we actually had a mechanism in place for all of the great customer feedback that we were starting to see as well. So it wasn't just about a stick and improving people at the lower end. It was about how do you reward the excellence and the consistency of the people at the top end as well. And the guys, if these TVs go down for a day now, I think for the first time ever we get bombarded with messages around what's happening. Quickly, we need to get our comments back up on the boards, because people love to see this. They love to see what customers are telling about their very specific interaction with that customer.
I think that's a very nice touch. Very nice touch.
So just onto the results then. I'll just talk through top level. So on the left-hand side, I made the point about volume and getting enough of the volume to make this very meaningful, and to get to this point where the team managers and the coaches could absolutely have a day construct around direct customer feedback, actioning that, addressing the root cause of the customer, and coaching their people. So you can see on the left-hand chart, the blue line is the volume of customer feedback in responses on the axis on the left. So you can see we've gone from a point of having, pretty much negligible volumes of customer feedback through to around, just in our faults and repair channel on SMS, around 9,000 pieces of direct customer feedback in a month. So clearly enough volume, one, to understand real trends that hit the business and we can do something about from a BI perspective, but also enough of it that the managers can then focus on coaching their people based on that. Interestingly, the red line, which is the percentage on the right axis, we've seen from the outset around 35% of our initial volume was a red alert. So back to this point about a customer telling us a 1 or a 2, I'm in distress, you need to help me out here. Now previously we would never have, 1, asked the customer for feedback, or 2, had a mechanism to do anything about it in volume terms. So interestingly, we've gone direct out to those customers. As I said, it was the responsibility of the team manager to do that. And you can see that as our volume has increased, as we've reduced the reactive coaching in the business, that our volume of red alerts has consequentially dropped as well. So you can see that our volume of red alerts is now around 10%. A real clear call out is just the volume in there. Our SMS feedback is up around 150%. And to Lee's point previously as well, I think the real push for us initially was, let's get the volume, because one, we then get the volume down to agent level in a simple format, but we can also really push this point around service recovery and those customers in distress. What that's flowing through to on the right-hand side is both our MPI or MPS measure and advisor SAT. So just to put it into context, we were horrifically bad, clearly, if you look back at November 10. But interestingly, we've gone from a position on NPS of -28 to +27. And really pleasingly for me, is our teams have been able to a large extent to sustain that. So irrespective of what happens in weather, for example, we all know there's a direct link between the NPS and the wait time. So the longer customers have to wait, the more dissatisfied they are. But we've largely now been able to control that and set a real sustainability level across those scores as well, which is very pleasing. I touched on the point on retained revenue, and for me this was the real eureka moment, because we've previously, and maybe to some extent still in a position that it's all about cost transformation, it's about removing waste from the business. And we've had a view that focusing on customer experience is absolutely the right thing to do, but now we can put a financial value to that, linked to our broadband channel. We know now that a point move in NPS is worth 0.6% reduction in churn, and we can then financially link that back to our ARPU levels and get a very clear view of retained revenue, about 0.4% reduction per question shift in our PSTN channel, which is generally a more stable base. So it gives us a real seat at the table in terms of that's the commercial value of really focusing on the voice of the customer. Just further on the benefits, on the left-hand chart here, an indirect but absolutely welcomed value is that we've seen a reduction in our repeat contact rates. So on the left-hand chart, the blue line is 7-day repeat contacts back into our business, and the red line is 28-day repeat contacts back into our business. So you can see that our 28-day, interestingly, we've seen a reduction from 38 to 33%. Now the consequence of that is circa 1.5% reduction in our OPEX costs. Really interestingly, on the right-hand chart, you can start to see the visible shift of customers from detractor through neutral into promoters, which links back to everything that I've touched on previously. and most importantly to this point about reduction in churn and retained revenue benefit. In terms of taking the people on the journey with us, our employee engagement results are now 11% stronger, so BT Business and the faults and repair channel 11% stronger than the rest of the BT group, and significantly ahead of external benchmark on a lot of questions around things like my manager values people who do the right thing for the customer, and I receive useful and timely feedback based on customer conversations. So you can see the direct link that getting that volume as quickly as possible to when the incident occurred flows through into everything I've talked through there. And interestingly, our call observations, so the volume of observations our team managers do, has increased by circa 350%. So you can see even from that figure alone, the volume of time our managers spend with our people has significantly increased. Just finally to touch on what next, so we've been working, we've delivered some good results for me. There's still a hell of a lot to go at. So we've been working with a behavioural change company and also with our internal L&D teams to look at how we really flex the customer conversation to make it very specific to them. So similar to probably Insights, Myers-Briggs that some people will be familiar with, but how do you make that customer feel like that is the only conversation that help desk advisor will have today? How do you really make it personal for them, given that in the SME market, this customer's business is what has stopped operating, which is slightly different to the consumer piece. So from that pilot that we've run, we can see a further 7-point shift in our MPI or MPS score, a further reduction in our 28-day repeat contacts, and very interestingly, a significant uplift in our leads to sales. So this is where our service channel are able to create sale opportunities through, for example, if in our environment very pertinent at the moment is the fibre upsell or fibre opportunity for customers. In terms of what we're also doing on the right-hand side, we've been working with the nice FizzBack team as well to look at recategorization of our red alerts. So if they're now 1 and 2, then do we push that on to 3 and 4? Because quite frankly, a customer that scores you a 3 or 4 is still a crap experience. Segmentation of our FizzBack results as well. So is there opportunity within that to start looking at the top end and proactively looking at our kind of above the line marketing approach to that, and also around customer effort. So measuring NPS, but also starting to look at some of the McKinsey work on how easy is it to do business in a particular part of BT. So I hope that gives a flavour. Happy to take questions at the end, but hopefully that gives a flavour of where we've been, the problems we had previous, the results we've started to see, and what it is we're looking to do next.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Scott. I think there's certainly some very very impressive results on that. Certainly going from a minus 28 Net Promoter Score to plus 27, plus all the other metrics, I think is exceedingly exciting. We're just going to hold questions for a bit. We're going to go across to Lee now, who's just going to briefly take us through some of the technology options that you can deploy. Lee, across to you.
Okay, great stuff. So really what I'm going to talk through now is just how the feedback process works behind the system, so to show how Scott was able to deliver those results. So in short, there's the engagement process with the customer, so physically polling the customer for their feedback. And as I talked earlier, there's a number of channels in order to do that. And it's about selecting the right channels to get the right balance. So we're not necessarily saying substitute all your feedback from one channel to another. It's getting the right balance to meet your need. So telephone interview, still massively important for gathering deep insight, but for those transactional short, sharp surveys, then clearly the SMS or the web or email are preferable. The importance comes from managing all of that data, so back to the point of 200 times the volume, or in Scott's example, sort of 10,000 pieces of feedback coming through. You need an engine that can automatically aggregate all of that information to derive meaning from it. And I guess the most important point is what you then do. So having all this great information is good, but clearly you need to take action. So there are a number of things which we look to advocate. The first is closing the loop with the customer. So thanking the customer for giving the feedback, and if things haven't gone well, then there's an ability to do a level of apology. The second is some next best action. So those customers that express dissatisfaction or distress, as Scott talked about, route that customer record to the right person within the organisation who can take some corrective action, but also send it to people who are perhaps further upstream in the process, because maybe it was a process failure, so you need to alert someone to perhaps a problem further upstream. The second is to aggregate all of the feedback through some sophisticated dashboarding to share all of that insight throughout the organisation at the appropriate level. So if I'm an advisor in the call centre, I want to see the responses from all of my calls in real time. I want to know my score. I want to read the verbatim, and so I can self-improve. If I'm the MD or the contact centre manager, I want to see the aggregated view from my area of responsibility, and that needs to be done in real time. And then finally, link to other solutions, other systems you have within the organisation. So probably the best example would be a CRM system. So taking the customer feedback, populating the CRM system, so further action can be taken downstream, either when the customer calls next, or when there's a churn prediction model running, or any other sort of campaign. Use the customer feedback to inform other decisions throughout the organisation. So really, we're talking about beyond measurement. It's managing, it's changing, it's acting on the insight to drive improvement. So really, what I wanted to show you very quickly is the SMS process, because based on the poll earlier, this is perhaps relatively new technology to some of you. So just wanted to show you how we engage with the end user. So this is Julia, and Julia contacted the contact centre earlier today. And we've sent her a message through SMS to gather her feedback. So the message reads, "Hi Julia, thanks for calling David at ABC Mobile Care." So what we've done there is we've personalised the message to the customer, so we know it, so the customer knows it's relevant to her. And we've also referenced the contact centre agent Julia spoke with, which was David. And clearly we've mentioned the company, so Julia knows which interaction we're referring to. We've asked Julia an overall satisfaction question. So overall, how satisfied were you with the service David provided? And Julia has responded slightly dysfunctionally with perfect. So we asked Julia for 10 through to 0, but Julia's responded with perfect, but that's okay, because the technology itself will interpret the response that Julia's made and will assign a numeric score to that answer. In this case, 10 out of 10 because she said perfect. We don't want to interrupt the flow by going back to Julia to say, no, sorry, we need an answer between 10 and 0. We're not that robotic. We want to keep this a very conversational process. And some of those factors, the adaptation, the personalisation, mean we can achieve those higher response rates, the 25, 30 and higher response rates. The second question, so we've gone back to Julia and said, great to hear that. So we know that Julia said perfect, we know that's positive, so we can reference that in our follow-up question. And we've said, based on your experience, how would you rate your willingness to recommend the brand? So again, highly personalised, and in this case, Julia has put a 9. So great, we know it's 9 out of 10, we know she's an advocate, which is great. So again, we'll go back to Julia with a great to hear that, and then we'll send her the third question of this survey. Now what we've got set up here is we've got a set of rotating questions. So Julia will receive one of a bank of many KPI questions. So it could be a first call resolution, it could be, in this case, an upsell question. The point is, as an organisation, you want to get feedback on a number of different things, but you don't want a single customer having a really long SMS survey process. So we're only going to ask Julia one of the rotating questions. In this case, the handset insurance question. Julia's responded with some text speak, so LOL, yep. And again, we know yep means yes, so we can do the conversion, so we know that David did offer the handset loss insurance. So we'll finish by thanking Julia, and we'll ask for some the verbatim feedback. So this is where really we want to understand the reasons for her rating. This is where we get the rich verbatim comments. So in Julia's response, she's put, your staff are pleasant. So the natural language processing engine that sits in the system essentially will read the comment and will automatically assign different sentiments and pull out different categories of feedback. So in this case, the staff were pleasant. So that's positive sentiment about staff rapport. So we'll categorise the comment in that way. The second part of the response is the automated payment could not be taken due to something wrong with your system, and this is the third time why. So clearly negative, and negative about the payment system, so we'll flag that. Julia then mentions a competitor. I heard Z Mobile just launched some new plans. So again, we can flag the fact that Julia's made a competitor mention, and we'll flag that as at risk. So we could take a look to see where Julia is in her contract, and we can make the assumption that if she's towards the end of her contract, she's looking at change, she's mentioned a competitor, so that algorithm will say at risk. So we'll do a few things with that. We'll send a red alert, and that red alert will go to the retentions team to say Julia's at risk, some action needs to be taken. We can send an alert around the process with the payment system. So again, we can inform the payments department that another piece of feedback has come in about the automated payment system. That could be the 10th today, the 100th, 1000th. They can aggregate all of that feedback to determine the size of the issue. And from a performance management perspective, the scores Julia has given will aggregate against David's other feedback. So David may get 100 pieces of feedback this month, so Julia's score contributes to his individual performance. And in this case, it could inform David's bonus. It might make him eligible for bonus. And the feedback around his friendly rapport will go into the coaching model to say, David is good at the friendly rapport with the advisor. And then we'll close the loop with Julia to say, that's great. Thanks for giving the feedback, and we'll explain that we'll use it to continue to improve the service. So really, by way of summary, wanted to make the point that any voice of customer program needs to have an operational focus. This is where you drive the biggest benefits. So looking to increase customer satisfaction with the frontline interaction and managing those at-risk customers to stop customers walking away from your business. The point of experience, the engagement, the real-timeness of the polling, paramount to drive those high response rates and have that engaging conversation with the customer. Driving actions, clearly, that's how you deliver the ROI. It's using the feedback and the insights to make a difference. And I guess finally, integrating with any other voice of customer technology or programs you've got running. And I guess the most common here would be integrated to call recording solutions. So if you're able to understand how a customer scored a particular interaction, if it's good, it'll be great to play back that call recording, the original call recording, so you can understand which parts of the call delivered a great experience to the customer. And equally, as Scott talked about, if things have gone less well and we've received some negative feedback from the customer, if you can listen to the call recording with the advisor, with the manager, you can probably pinpoint the exact moment where the level of dissatisfaction crept in. And from that, you can change the agent behavior, the language, to address any future issues. So integration is a key part. So really, that was all I wanted to talk about on the technology side. I hope that gives you a flavour of how the system works. And I think we're back over to another poll now, Jonty.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're going to go straight into the audience tips. We've had a number of tips, so if you want to send in a tip, you've got a very good chance of winning a bottle of champagne. I think last time I checked, we'd only had 4 tips, so you've probably got a better chance of winning a bottle of champagne than of winning the National Lottery, which is rather nice. So we've got a couple of tips that have come through on here. Anthea has said, rating the service online is the fastest and easiest form as we're moving into the technical era. Human interaction should be done when a low score, and direct agent feedback to avoid repetition of behavior. I guess, Scott, this very much ties into your feedback that if there's a low score, then going straight back to the customer is a way of avoiding that. How well did you find that worked within your organisation?
So I think at the outset it was the game changer for us. So previously, if we'd asked customers for feedback, then the process being as convoluted as it was and the level of detail we got, it wasn't really actionable. So I think getting out there to those customers, even just the ones and the twos, gave us a real opportunity to then think about, well, why is it that customers are giving us that feedback? What are the trends within that, and what organisationally do we need to do to stop that in the future? So yeah, it was certainly the initial benefit of that was probably the biggest one that pushed us to the kind of 3 to 6 month ROI on implementing the tool in the first place.
Yeah, Andre has sent in actually I think this is a tip. How about social media feedback? This is a channel we monitor and found it is very used by customers. Lee, do you find that social media is a sort of area that you've dealt with more and more?
Yeah, very much so. So I think clearly the focus of what we've talked about today was the operational feedback for driving agent improvements and customer recovery. But certainly social media is one of those feedback channels we use, and as you say, it is growing by the day. I think that the difficulty there is trying to get like an authenticated transaction, trying to identify who the customer is. Because clearly you want to reach out to help. That can be a bit more difficult, but it's certainly looking at the sentiment and the topics that customers are talking about can inform the contact center. So a recent example, the iPhone 5 launch, social media, Twitter, Facebook went crazy when the announcement was made. You can start to inform the operation around predicting perhaps call volume or the latest thing that's going to drive calls into the call center.
So Hannah sent in a tip here saying customers rate calls wrongly in the IVR, most probably because they don't understand or they don't have the time. So I guess it really is quite critical about choosing the right types of questions there. Kerry said we're in the process of introducing a voice of the customer committee, which means we can get feedback from the advisors on what customers are telling them throughout their calls. This is used in conjunction with other feedback received from the advisor community. Is that an area you looked at setting up a committee there, Scott?
I wouldn't say it is, but I think it's a fantastic idea. I'm a firm believer in kind of bottom-up change. What we've been able to get through the Nice Fizzback solution is the direct feedback to agent level, and then to have those coaching sessions to get their feedback based on that and take the trending from it. But yeah, I think it's a very good idea.
Yeah, and Ben's got a cracking tip here. What about getting more in-depth feedback from customers who've had a good experience? To deliver this across the board, you want to know what you're doing well. I guess that's very good positive reinforcement. I guess that's the sort of thing you'd want to put up to some extent on those wall boards.
Yeah, so it pretty much is the process. So we do talk internally about green alerts. It's not something that, the red alert comes in, it goes direct into the team managers and there's a priority level associated to it. The green alerts don't go through the same process, but it's how we determine, one, what goes on those wall boards, and two, what our general reward and recognition structure would look like internally as well. So yeah, definitely something I would strongly recommend.
Angela said,
if I can chip in there as well.
Certainly.
So when I talked about that distribution curve earlier on, what we find is when you ask the silent majority how they feel, you get a heavy skew to those green alerts. So if you think around 80% of the feedback you get on the census approach is going to be positive. So you move from having a very small percentage of written compliments to all of a sudden massive amounts of volume of things that are going well, that you can use to celebrate success and learn from. So I couldn't agree with that comment more.
Interesting comment from Angela about face-to-face feedback. Decent refreshments and the shopping voucher. I guess that's quite good for a small sample that would struggle to get a sort of perhaps a more census. John said I didn't notice anything about using a web link by text. That would be quite an interesting one. Is that something you particularly do there, Lee?
Yeah, no, we do that for a number of our customers. The hesitancy from some customers is, or probably the legacy around data charges on mobile networks. So it is something we do use, but we find the SMS approach and that conversational approach is good, and we certainly use web links on email as well. So yeah, we use all of the above, I guess.
Okay, we're just going to skip forward, and there's a number of questions in from the audience. Reese said we get a lot of feedback through some channels, but it's quite difficult to collect all the feedback from different channels into one location to review. Is that something you've looked at, Lee?
Yeah, so the dashboard solution essentially can suck information and feedback from any source. So it could be SMS, it could be emails, it could be legacy IVR data or text chats. But I think the important piece is running all of those verbatim comments through the same analytics engine. So you're comparing like for like, you're looking for the same sentiment in the comment and the same level of categorization. So that's certainly something we we do with many customers.
I think just to add to that, I think what's important is a kind of divide and conquer approach. So for me, even implementation of the nice fizzback solution, it's not about, right, we've got a really simple dashboard now, let's put a team of 5 people looking at it. It's about everybody seeing this as the most fundamental part of their day role, is to deal with that direct customer feedback. So it's about everybody being engaged in that process.
And Scott, we've got a final question for you here from Kerry. It says, how have you got all of your managers fully engaged in the voice of the customer principles, or have you got them engaged? In which case, how was it done?
So I'll be really honest and say no. It's a huge change to what the guys traditionally managed on. So from a culture of call handle time, very productivity driven, to a culture where it's direct customer feedback and you're coaching people on that. So it's been probably 12 to 18 month journey. Are we there yet? Absolutely not. What I would say is that those people that now don't deal in volume direct customer feedback are becoming very exposed within the organization, and actually it just feels like a different place, and there has to be some honest conversations where if it's not for some people, then it's time to look for something else. And it's just that the culture's changed in that environment, and the people have to change with it.
Okay, well, we've got a whole load of questions. Unfortunately, we can't get through to. But what we're going to do is we're going to write up all of the feedback we've had from here, and we'll be publishing that next week in Call Center Helper.